Hello everyone, Dr. Khatami is here. Today we're going to talk about chapter 12 of our Human Anatomy textbook, Fundamentals of the Nervous System and Nervous Tissue. Right now, think about it. You can hear my voice. Am I right? You can see the screen. And you can even write down notes when you're listening. Congratulations! All of these are examples of your nervous system working. Our nervous system controls everything. Your thoughts, your actions, and even your emotions going to be controlled by the nervous system. The nervous system communicates using the electrical signals or action potential. It works very fast, giving you immediate reactions. Nervous system is a fantastic system of our body. Today in this chapter, we'll talk about the functions of the nervous system, the parts of the nervous system, then we'll focus on the nerve cells or neurons, and then glial cells, which together gonna make our nervous tissue, and finally we'll learn how these neurons are organized to make up the structure of the nervous system. First of all, let's look at the general functions of the nervous system. The nervous system has three main functions: sensory input, integration, and motor output are the three main functions of the nervous system. Our nervous system uses millions of sensory receptors to monitor changes happening both inside and outside of the body. These changes are called stimuli. These stimuli can be temperature, pressure, sound, light, and then all of this information going to be gathered as the sensory input. So it means our nervous system can gather the sensory information, and it's called sensory input. Second functions of the nervous system is that the nervous system gonna process and interprets the sensory input to decide what action needs to be taken. This part is called integration. Third, it responds by activating muscles or glands to take actions. And we call this response as motor output. It seems very simple, right? But believe me, it's very complicated. Let me give you an example. Just imagine you see a glass of water on the table. The side of the glass is the stimulus. So your nervous system receives the sensory input regarding the seeing the glass on table, and then it like process this visual information, and then it tells your arm muscle to reach out and pick up the glass. That is a just very simple example of the functions of the nervous system. Or another example is when you're eating. The sensory input is the taste of the food. Then your nervous system receives the sensory input regarding the taste of the food and process that, and then tells your salivary glands to produce more saliva. So then you can see in these two examples, we could summarize the functions of the nervous system as the sensory input is going to receive or gather all of the sensory information coming from inside or outside of the body, and then it's going to processes those all sensory information and take an action by sending the response to the muscle or glands, and we call this as motor output. We can divide our nervous system to two parts. We have central nervous system, CNS, and peripheral nervous system, or PNS. Let's talk about the central nervous system. The central nervous system includes the brain, which is found inside of the skull, and the spinal cord, which gonna be found in the back of the body in the vertebral canal. So brain and spinal cord is going to be part of our central nervous system. The central nervous system, or the CNS, is like the control center of the nervous system. All of the sensory signals, the sensory information from the body, it can be sent to the CNS, and then CNS figures out what they mean and decides how to respond based on what we've learned in the past or how we feel right now. Now, let's talk about the second part of the nervous system, which is the peripheral nervous system, or PNS. This part is outside of the CNS and mostly includes the nerves, which can be cranial nerves. The nerves can send the signals to the brain, or can come from the brain, or even the spinal nerves. They are related. They are coming or going to the spinal cord, but they are part of the peripheral nervous system. So the cranial nerves, the spinal nerves, these are the part of the peripheral nervous system. In the PNS also we have ganglia, which ganglia is the group of neuron cell body, group of neuron cell bodies found in our PNS that help in this communication. So one more time, make sure you know in the central nervous system, we have brain and spinal cord found in the skull and in the vertebral column. Then outside of the CNS, we have peripheral nervous system, which is composed of the cranial nerves, spinal nerves, and ganglia. All right, so far we talked about the general function of the nervous system and then the two main divisions of the nervous system. Now we are going to look at the level of organization in the nervous system. So as you can see here at this side, we have the central nervous system, brain and spinal cord. This is the integration center, is the control center. And the other side, we have the peripheral nervous system. On the peripheral nervous system, we have two division based on the direction of the signals coming and going. We can divide our peripheral nervous system to two division: sensory division and motor division. This sensory division, also called as afferent division. This means it carries signals toward the central nervous system. So if you look at this like blue line or blue arrow, it's showing you how the sensory division of the peripheral nervous system is working. It's going to detect the changes like the stimulus about pain, temperature, pressure from receptor, gather those information through the sensory input or sensory fiber, and send them to the central nervous system. This part of the peripheral nervous system is called sensory division. It should be easy to understand. So sensory division is the part of the peripheral nervous system which it can gather the information and from the receptor and then send all of this information to the central nervous system. And then the other part of the peripheral nervous system is the motor division or efferent division. This division carries signals away from the CNS. Look at this red arrow, that the information gonna be sent away from the CNS. So again, if I wanna draw or write the under PNS, we have the motor division. The motor division starts from the CNS and then send these signals to the effector, which are effectors can be muscle or gland. When the motor signals reach the muscle, they cause them to contract. And when they reach glands, they make the glands secrete substances. Okay, let's do it one more time. We talked about the central nervous system before, right? We know that is an integration center. It means we should send all of the sensory information or sensory output from the receptor to the central nervous system. That part of the peripheral nervous system is called sensory division. So we have the sensory or afferent division from receptor to the central nervous system. And the other part of the peripheral nervous system is motor division or efferent division from CNS to the effector, which these effectors are muscles and glands. So one more time, we have receptor, we have CNS, and then we have the effectors. Okay, so this part we have sensory division of the peripheral nervous system. At this side we have motor division of the peripheral nervous system. Means through the sensory fibers, through the sensory neurons, through the sensory division, we are going to send the sensory signals toward the central nervous system, and in our motor division, or efferent division, or through our motor nerve fibers, we are going to send the signals away from the CNS or conduct the impulses from the CNS to the effectors, which are effectors can be glands or can be muscles. Okay, then the both sensory input and motor outputs, or sensory division and motor division, can be further divided based on the body regions they serve. We can divide them to the somatic and then to the somatic and visceral. So we have somatic as somatic sensory fiber, and also we have visceral sensory fiber, or we have somatic motor fiber or motor fiber of somatic nervous system, or we have the visceral motor neuron or motor division. What does it mean? Somatic and visceral. The somatic body region includes the structures outside the ventral body cavity, like your skin, like your muscle, like your bones. If the sensory signals coming from your skin, coming from your muscle, coming from your bones to the central nervous system is called somatic sensory fiber or somatic sensory division. And then the visceral body region contains the organs within the ventral body cavity, such as the digestive organs like stomach, esophagus, or the respiratory organs like lungs, the cardiovascular system organs like heart. So if this sensory information coming from our internal organs like the stomach, then we call this as visceral sensory fiber. Then under the motor division also we have somatic nervous system and autonomic nervous system. Somatic motor is the voluntary control of skeletal muscle in the outer part of the body. The somatic nervous system is the voluntary control of our muscle. And then the visceral motor, also known as the autonomic nervous system, this controls involuntary functions, like it can control the smooth muscle, it can control the cardiac muscle, and also it can control the glands. So that part of the motor division which can send the signals from CNS to these part of the body like smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, and glands is called the autonomic nervous system or the visceral motor. And the other part of the motor division, which is going to send the impulses or the response from the central nervous system to the skeletal muscle, is called the the somatic nervous system. These subdivisions are important to understand how the nervous system perform their function, and we'll go into more detail about each one. Okay, so when we talked about the sensory input and motor output, let's one more time look at each of these terms. We have sensory signals or afferent signals or sensory input. Sensory input. The sensory input or sensory signals can be picked up by sensory receptors. So the sensory receptors are very sensitive structures of the nervous system which they can detect the changes or stimuli. For example, regarding the temperature, regarding the touch, pressure, or light, or sound. And then, so that signals regarding the sensation is called sensory input. Our sensory input going to be carried by the nerve fibers of the PNS to the CNS. So we call that part as sensory division. So the sensory division of our nervous system is going to send all of the sensory input to the CNS. And then we talked about the motor signals or efferent signals or motor output. The motor output are the responses that are going to be carried away from the CNS. So they're coming from the CNS, going to the effectors, which are effectors can be muscles and glands. So as I mentioned before, if the CNS is going to send the signals to the muscle can contract. If the signals go to the gland, so the gland can produce their product. So that is this two main part of our peripheral nervous system. So then we divided our peripheral nervous system to these two main divisions. We have sensory division carrying the sensory information to the CNS, and then the other part, which is motor division, is going to carry the motor output toward the effectors, which the effectors are the muscles or glands. Okay, and now let's just review all the things we talked about them so far. We divided our PNS to the sensory and then motor. And as I mentioned before, according to the region which our nervous system is serving, we can divide them to the somatic and visceral. So we have somatic and visceral. So let me just define the somatic and visceral one more time. The somatic, it means the part of the body, the regions of the body that it's going to be outside of the ventral body cavity, like your skin is part of the somatic body region. Your muscles, your bones, and the visceral body region, it means the organs, the internal organs within the ventral body cavity, like your stomach, your lungs, your heart, your bladder. Okay, so then we can divide our sensory division to the somatic sensory and visceral sensory. It means that if those sensory information, for example, regarding the touch, pain, pressure, vibration, temperature, even proprioception, which means the sensation which coming from your joints, and this actually help you sense where your body parts are without looking. So they are coming from your skin, your body wall, and your limbs. We call them as somatic sensory division. And then when the sensory information like stretch, pain, temperature, chemical changes, irritation in visceral organs like nausea, hunger, they reach to the central nervous system, we call that part as visceral sensory division. And for motor division, we divided to the somatic motor system, which is our voluntary motor system, which means our effectors are skeletal muscles. So then our motor output going to be sent to the skeletal muscle and stimulate them to be contracted. And then the visceral motor or autonomic nervous system, which then is going to be divided to the sympathetic and parasympathetic, is going to send the motor signals or motor output from CNS to the smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, and glands. We're going to talk about these a lot in our nervous system, as we divided our nervous system chapter to the nervous tissue chapter, which is chapter 12, and then we're going to talk about the central nervous system in chapter 13, and then we're going to talk about the peripheral nervous system and also autonomic nervous system. We're going to repeat this again and again and again and again, so you're going to understand it completely. So don't be worried if you are a little bit confused. We're going to talk about this a lot. Just right now, make sure you know the definition of the sensory and motor, which sensory means like just gathering the sensory information, sending them to the CNS, and motor, it means just sending the responses from CNS to the effectors. Make sure you know we have receptors. They are the like very sensitive structures. They can collect and they can detect the changes, and then the effectors are muscles or glands. And also make sure you know the difference between somatic body region and visceral body region. The somatic body region includes the structure outside of the ventral body cavity, like skin, muscle, bone, and the visceral body region contains the organs within the ventral body cavity, such as the digestive organ, lungs, heart, and bladder. Also, I recommend you guys to draw this for yourself, and then it's going to be a very good way to practice and learn the level of organization in the nervous system. So as you can see in this picture, you can see this area that, or yes, this blue line, it's pointing that the information, the sensory information gathered in our skin, and then they be sent to the central nervous system. Because it's coming from the skin, is somatic. Because it's going to send the information to the CNS, it's sensory. Okay, let's look at this one. It's coming from the stomach to the central nervous system. Stomach is part of the visceral body region. So that is visceral, because it's going to send the information to the central nervous system, that is sensory. So this is visceral sensory fiber or visceral sensory division. And then look at here. Look at this fiber. Look at the direction of these signals coming from the CNS toward the heart or cardiac muscle, or coming from the CNS toward the smooth muscle of the bladder, or coming from the nervous system toward the skeletal muscle, because it's gonna take away signals from the CNS to the effectors. We call this as motor division. So all of them are motor division, but because this one, it goes to the skeletal muscle, it's going to be motor fiber of the somatic nervous system, but these two gonna be sent to the cardiac muscle. The smooth muscle is gonna be the autonomic nervous system or visceral motor, which then later on you're gonna see that we're gonna divide it to the sympathetic and parasympathetic motor fiber. Don't worry about this, just right now. Okay. Let's continue. Okay, so that was an introduction regarding the nervous system function, the nervous system organization, and now we're going to talk about the nervous tissue. So again, if you remember the level of organization from smallest to largest, we have cells, we have tissues, we have organ, then organ system, and then organism. Right? Okay. So the organism. The nervous system is the organ system that today we're going to talk about. Nervous system is a controlling system. It can control everything, every single thing happening in our body, in our organs, in our tissues, in our cells. What are the organs of the nervous system? We just talked about it, right? In the nervous system, we talked about the brain, spinal cord, cranial nerves, spinal nerves. So these are the important organs of the nervous system. Okay, so the example for organ like brain, like spinal cord, and also even nerves. Spinal nerves, cranial nerves, these are the example of the organ of the nervous system. So if you break down any of these organs, you can find different type of tissues. But the main tissue of these organs is nervous tissue. Okay, so now let's talk about the nervous tissue a little bit. So in the nervous tissue, we can find two main cell types. We have neurons or nerve cells. Neuron or nerve cells are very special cells as they are the cells can be stimulated or can be excited. What does it mean stimulated or excited? If the cells can produce the action potentials and they are able to conduct the action potentials, we call that cell as excitable cells. In our body, nerve cells and muscle cells are able to be stimulated, create the action potential, and conduct the action potential. So the neurons or nerve cells are the excitable cells, means they can transmit the electrical signals or action potential. And then we have another cells which going to be found around the neurons. We call them as supporting cells, as their job is to support and take care of our neuron cells or neuron or nerve cells. These called neuroglial cells. So the neuroglial cells are non-excitable cells. It means that they are not able to produce the action potential. They are not able to conduct the electrical signals. So they are just there to support the neurons. They can be found around the neurons. They can surround and wrap neurons. Okay, now let's talk about the neuron a little bit more. So neuron or a nerve cell. Neuron or a nerve cell, as I mentioned before, is excitable cell. It can produce the action potential or nerve impulses or electrical signals, and also it can conduct these electrical signals throughout the body. Neurons have the extreme longevity. It means they live very long time, maybe more than 100 years for all life. Neurons do not divide like other cells. Once they start working in the nervous system after birth, they stop dividing. So if they get damaged, they cannot replace themselves. But in some places of the brain, we find neural stem cells that can make new neurons. But mostly the neuron of most part of the brain, they cannot be replaced after being damaged. Okay. Now we talk about the parts of the neuron. So we can define a cell body or soma, the part of the neuron, which in the cell body or the soma of the neuron, we can find the nucleus. Inside of the nucleus, there is a dark spot. It's called nucleolus, which, if you remember, nucleolus is the part of the nucleus which is responsible to produce the ribosomes. In the cell body, there are some other structures called mini-cell bodies, which they are the groups of rough endoplasmic reticulum. So we have lots of rough endoplasmic reticulum and also free ribosomes because the neuron is responsible to produce the neurotransmitter. Neurotransmitter is the chemical messenger which the neuron can release the neurotransmitter, and through releasing the neurotransmitter, they can communicate to another neuron or to the muscle cells. So that's the reason, because neurotransmitter is a protein, that's the reason inside of the neuron cell body, we can find many rough endoplasmic reticulum and also free ribosomes, which the group of these rough endoplasmic reticulum and ribosomes is called mini-cell bodies. And then as you saw, the nucleolus also going to be found in their nucleus, which is showing that it's actively making the ribosomes. And also in their cell body, we can find the neurofibrils, which neurofibrils are bundles of filaments, the intermediate filaments. And then we can define the neuron processes, which like an arm, they're coming out of the cell body. We have dendrites and axons. Okay, now let's look at this picture of a neuron and talk about the structure of the neuron. So this is a picture of the neuron that, as you can see, is kind of a very special cell. So we define the cell body. So here, this part is called cell body, which has the nucleus, and then the nucleolus is this dark spots inside of the nucleus. And then you can find inside of the cytoplasm of the cell body the cell bodies as these chromatophilic substances, which they are showing the presence of rough endoplasmic reticulum and ribosomes. And also we have some other like organelles of the regular cells inside of their cell body. Most neuron cell bodies are in the central nervous system, but in the peripheral nervous system, we have some cell bodies. When in the peripheral nervous system, we have collection of the cell bodies. We call that structure as ganglion or ganglia. So ganglion or ganglia is, it means the collection of the cell bodies in the peripheral nervous system. All right, let's talk about the neuron processes. So these are like arms coming out of the cell body. We have two types. We have dendrites and we have axons or axon. They have different name. They have different jobs and structure. First, we have dendrites. Most neurons have many dendrites and they look like tree branches. Dendro means tree. Dendrites are responsible for receiving signals from other neurons. These signals travel toward the cell body. So if I want to draw the direction of the signals, So I have to draw something like that. Look at the direction of the signals. They're going to be sent toward the cell body. So we can think of dendrites as the receivers of the neuron. They're going to get the signals from other neurons and then send them to the cell body of the neuron. Next, we have axons. Axons are like the senders or messengers. So if I want to draw the direction of the signals or action potential, I should draw something like that. They're going to send out the signals from the cell body to the ending of the axon or the axon terminal. Axon, we have like a different sizes of the axon. Axon can be really short or they can be super long. For example, the axons that control the muscles in your feet can stretch all the way from your lower back to your feet, more than a meter long. When an axon is very long, we call it a nerve fiber. The size of the axon matters too. Bigger axons send signals faster than smaller axons. So, and also we can say that the axons can be myelinated or non-myelinated. In this picture, you can see the myelinated axons. That myelin is a like lipid and protein sheath which can cover the axon. Okay, and this picture is a histology picture of a part of the nervous tissue, which you can see this neuron with many dendrites and only one axon. And also you can see these dark spots around the neuron, which they are nuclei of neuroglial cells. Okay, next, let's talk about the synapse, which is a communication site of neurons. Synapse is a place where two neurons communicate, where information passes from one neuron to another. It's very important because it makes sure information goes in only one direction in the nervous system. We have two types of synapse. We have chemical synapse, which is the most common type of synapse in our body. In this type of synapse, neurons use chemicals called the neurotransmitter. So the chemical messenger in the chemical synapses are the neurotransmitter. And then through releasing the neurotransmitter, they're going to send the signals. Most neurons in your brain and body communicate through chemical synapses. And then we have the electrical synapses, which is a less common type of the synapse found in some areas of the central nervous system. Instead of chemical synapse, neuron use something called gap junction. So through the gap junctions, the cell can be connected to each other, and through the gap junction, they can send the signals from one neuron to another neuron for direct electrical communication. So it's a direct electrical communication, and this type of synapse is very fast. It's faster than the chemical synapse because it doesn't need to like produce something like neurotransmitter. It's just gonna send the signals from one cell to another cell through the gap junction, and that's it. So it's very faster than the chemical synapse. So in this picture, you can see a picture that two neurons connected by synapse. So the neurons that send the signal to the synapse is called presynaptic neuron. And the cell is going to receive the signals and take it away from the synapse is called postsynaptic neuron. So for each synapse, we can define presynaptic neuron, a neuron before synapse, as pre means before. And also we have the postsynaptic neuron. So the presynaptic neuron, it brings the information to the synapse. So the direction of the impulse from presynaptic neuron to the synapse. And then the postsynaptic neuron is going to receive the signal and then take away from the synapse. Okay, so far we learned about the nervous tissue is the main tissue of the organs of the nervous system. And we're talking about the neuron or nerve cell. We learned that in the neuron structure, we have cell body, we have dendrite, we have axon. We learned that what do we have in this cell body of the neuron, what is the dendrite and axon, what is their job, and how they're going to communicate to each other. And now we're going to talk about the different type of neuron based on their shape, based on the number of these cytoplasmic processes they have, or the type of cytoplasmic processes they have. We can divide them to the multipolar, bipolar, and unipolar. The naming of these neurons are descriptive. So multipolar, it means that they're cytoplasmic processes coming out of like multiple parts of the neuron. Bi means two, means they have two different parts of the neuron which the cytoplasmic processes can come out. And uni means one, so it means they only have one cytoplasmic process coming out of the neuron. And let's look at each of these individually. That is an example of the multipolar neuron. That is over actually 99% of neuron in our body are multipolar. So that is the most common type of neuron in our body. Over 99% of neurons in our body are multipolar. So as you can see in this picture, they actually have many dendrites and one axon. They have more than two processes. They have many dendrites and a single axon. Is a major neuron type in the CNS, which we talked about it. If you want to draw it, it should be very simple. Just draw the cell body, and then from the cell body, you can draw many dendrites, and then just one single axon. Don't forget the nucleus. Okay. Bipolar neuron. Bi, as I mentioned before, means two, so it means they have two processes extending from the opposite side of the cell body. So as you can see in this picture, we have the cell body. Inside of the cell body, we have the nucleus, and then we have one single axon and one single dendrite. This type of neuron, it's it's not very common in our body. So we mainly find them in the special sensory organs like eye or the nose or in our ear. So we can find them as the sensory neurons in the special sensory organs like in our ear, in our nose, in the olfactory epithelium, and also in the retina of the eye. So they actually function as the sensory neurons. Okay, and then the last one, structural classification of neuron. We have unipolar neuron. It's very interesting because they have only one cytoplasmic process coming out of the cell body, and then it's going to be divided to two. So then this single process is split into two. We have one as central process, which it goes toward the central nervous system, and another one is called peripheral process, which is goes to the receptor or coming from the receptors. The peripheral process acts like one acts like a dendrite and another one acts like a axon. So, or we can just simply call them as peripheral process, central process. Peripheral process as its end at the receptive endings, like the receptors would be here, and then the other part is called the central process, which runs into the CNS. Where can we find this type of neurons? They can be found in the sensory ganglia of the PNS. Do you remember the term ganglia? So if you forgot, let me just go back and look at this picture, which I draw the ganglia here. You can see is a collection of the cell body of neuron in PNS. So the cell body of neuron found in the ganglia of the PNS, these are this type of the neuron, unipolar neuron, and also they function as the sensory neurons. Okay, next we can divide our neurons based on their function. We can have sensory neurons. Just simply means that these neurons can collect and gather the sensory information and send those sensory input to the central nervous system. Motor neurons means these neurons can take away signals or like action potential from the central nervous system to the effectors. And interneurons, inter means between. So interneurons is going to be found between the sensory neuron and motor neurons, or we can call them as association neurons. Okay, so let's talk about each of these more sensory neurons, which is also be called as afferent neuron. These are the part of the sensory division of the PNS. As we learned before, these neurons can transmit the impulses toward the CNS from the sensory receptor. So these are called sensory neurons. Most of the sensory neurons are unipolar neurons, and some are bipolar neurons, which we have them in our special sense organs, like in our eye, in our ear, in our nose. And then the motor neurons or efferent neurons, these are part of the motor division of the PNS, means that they can carry signals away from the CNS to the effectors like muscles and glands. And they are actually multipolar with the cell bodies located in the central nervous system. They can form junctions with effectors to stimulate the muscle contraction or gland secretion. If you remember, in the muscle chapter, we learned about the neuromuscular junction. The neuromuscular junction is a synapse between a neuron and a muscle cell. And this neuron is a motor neuron. Can send the signals from CNS to the muscle. Then we have interneuron, which interneuron going to be found between sensory neuron and motor neuron, and they're going to be found in our central nervous system, and they are also multipolar neuron. Make up the more than 99% of all neurons are the interneurons, which actually they are super important because these neurons are important to process the information. So that's going to be found in our integration center, which they can process all the sensory information and make a response. Okay, and in this table, actually, you can compare the structural classes of the neurons and the functional classes of the neurons, which based on the number of processes they have or the way that the process is gonna come out of their cell body, we can divide the neurons to the multipolar neurons, bipolar neurons, and unipolar neurons. And based on the direction of the impulse conduction, we can divide the neuron to the motor neuron, sensory neuron, and interneuron. So as we mentioned before, the interneuron and motor neuron are the example of the multipolar. The bipolar neuron gonna be found, which they actually mostly they are sensory neuron. They're gonna be found in our special organs, like in our eye, in our ear, in our nose. And then we have the example of sensory neurons going to be found in the ganglia or the collection of the cell body out of the central nervous system, which they're going to be the example of the unipolar. So make sure you know the interneuron, motor neuron are multipolar. the bipolar neuron going to be found in our special sensory organs, and then the sensory neurons, most of the sensory neurons are unipolar neurons. Okay, and write down, please read this question. Very, very, very simple question regarding a nerve cell. And please comment down below on this YouTube video your correct answer. What is a nerve cell? It's the same as a nerve. It's the same as a nerve fiber. It's the same as a neuromyocyte. It's the same as a neuron. Please pause the video and comment down below. Good job. Okay, so the next part of our chapter 12 is regarding the supporting cells. So we're still talking about the nervous tissue. We know in nervous tissue we have nerve cells and then we have supporting cells. So supporting cells, there are 6 types of supporting cells. We have 4 of them in the central nervous system and 2 of them in the peripheral nervous system. Their job is to provide supportive function for the neurons, and also they can cover non-synaptic regions of the neurons, so kind of occupy the region which we do not have the neurons. Actually, we can say in our brain, I can say like around 80% of the brain gonna be supporting cells, and just the rest gonna be the neurons. Let's talk about the supporting cells or neuroglial cells in the CNS. We have 4 types of them in the central nervous system. We have ependymal cells, which the ependymal cells are the cells can line the cavity inside of the brain and also inside of this the spinal cord, and their job is related to the cerebrospinal fluid. They can produce and they can circulate the cerebrospinal fluid. And then we have astrocytes, these star-shaped cells, which they are largest and most numerous type of glial cells in the central nervous system. Then we have oligodendrocytes, which are also super important because they are responsible to form the myelin sheath around the central nervous system axons. And then we have the microglia, very, very tiny cells, which they act like a phagocytic cells. They can be involved in our immunity by fighting against the microorganism. And then let's look at the astrocyte in this picture, or the star cells of the CNS, as astro means star, so these star-shaped cells are called astrocytes. They are so large and most abundant type of glial cells in our central nervous system. So you can see they have radiating processes, and they're going to send these radiating processes between a neuron and a capillary, a tiny blood vessels. So it means that the astrocyte actually can transport nutrients from the blood to the neurons and help maintain the blood-brain barrier, which protects the brain from harmful substances. So as you can see, always can be found between neuron or between nervous tissue, and then the capillary is going to send these nutrients from blood to the neuron and waste products from neuron to the blood, and can be involved in making the blood-brain barrier, which this structure is going to protect our brain from the harmful substances. Next, we have the microglial cells. Micro means small, tiny. These are the smallest. These are the smallest and least abundant neuroglia in the CNS. They act as phagocytic cells. These are actually the macrophages of the CNS. If you remember, we talked about the phagocytosis or the macrophages, which the macrophages are the cells that they can engulf and digest the pathogens like bacteria, viruses, dead or damaged cells through the process is called phagocytosis. So the microglia also can act like that. They are part of our immune cells or immunity of our central nervous system. They can migrate to the damaged area to engulf microorganisms and also dead or injured neurons that you can see in this picture. Very tiny cells, but very important in our immunity. Then we have the ependymal cells. So ependymal cells, they're lining the cavities inside of the CNS, which this cavity is called ventricles. And also they can line the cavity inside of the spinal cord, which is called the central canal. So the ventricles of the brain, central canal of the spinal cord, gonna be lined by this simple epithelium called the ependymal cells. As you can see here on their apical surfaces, they have the cilia, which the cilia can move, and by this movement can help the circulation of the cerebrospinal fluid. And also they're going to be involved in producing the cerebrospinal fluid. So everything regarding the cerebrospinal fluid, their production, their circulation, ependymal cells are involved. Okay, then let's talk about the oligodendrocyte, the myelin producer of the central nervous system. So oligodendrocyte also, they have some branches, but have fewer branches in comparison with the astrocyte, but they have a very important job as they are responsible to form the myelin sheaths around the CNS axons. Not the CNS cell body, not the CNS dendrites, just CNS axons. So the myelin sheath, what is the myelin sheath? The myelin sheath is the structure made up of lipid and protein, which can insulate axons and also increase the speed of the electrical impulses. So then, as you can see here, we have an oligodendrocyte which can send the signals around the piece of the axon and then cover it and make the myelin sheath. And the area that we do not have the myelin sheath covered, we call this as node of Ranvier, or this myelin sheath gap. So then the signals can jump from one myelin sheath gap to another myelin sheath gap. So if you compare the conduction of the signals through the from the myelinated axon and non-myelinated axon, you can see that the signals can jump from one myelin gap to another gap, so that makes it very faster to be conducted in comparison with the non-myelinated axons. Okay, and then let's talk about the neuroglia in the PNS. We have satellite and Schwann cells. Satellite cells can surround and support the neuron cell bodies in ganglia. So, and again, we're talking about the ganglia, so just make sure you know ganglia are the cell body of the neuron, going to be found in a collection. The collection of the cell body of the neurons is called ganglia, which is going to be found in the peripheral nervous system, because as I mentioned before, most of the cell body going to be found in the central nervous system, but the one going to be found in the peripheral nervous system as a collection, we call them as ganglia. Then these cells, like a satellite around the planet, is going to be found around this neuron cell body. So that's the reason we call them as satellite cells. But then let's talk about the Schwann cells. Which Schwann cells act like the oligodendrocyte act for CNS. Oligodendrocyte is gonna create the myelin sheath around the CNS axons, and now Schwann cells gonna surround all axons in the PNS and form the myelin sheath around the axons of the peripheral nervous system. So the Schwann cell is responsible to create the myelin sheath around the PNS axons. And as we learned just now, the oligodendrocyte are going to form the myelin sheath around the CNS of axon. The axons of the CNS. Okay, so here you can see how the Schwann cell gonna cover the axon and also can form the myelin sheath around it. Okay, let's talk about the myelin sheath a little bit more. It's going to insulate the axons or nerve fiber and also speed the nerve impulses. So myelin sheaths are segmented structure composed of lipoprotein, which means lipid and protein, which going to be produced by oligodendrocyte in the central nervous system and Schwann cells in the PNS. All right, why is myelin important? Because they can do insulation. They can, like insulation of wires, the myelin can protect the axons of neurons and keeps the electrical signals from leaking out. So it can insulate the axons, and also it's important for the speed of the action potential conduction. So myelin helps nerve signals move faster. When a signal travels down a myelinated axons, it jumps between the gaps called node of Ranvier. This jumping makes the signals go much faster. Okay, so then let's talk about the myelinated versus non-myelinated axons. So myelinated axons, these axons are thick and they can send signals very fast because of the myelin. Non-myelinated axons, these axons are thin and send signals slowly. They have Schwann cells around them, but without the thick myelin layers. Okay, and now let's look at these myelinated axon in PNS and non-myelinated axon in PNS. So we can see that both going to be covered by the Schwann cell if we have the myelinated or myelin around that. So then the Schwann cell going to wrap around the axon again and again and again and again and again to make the myelin sheath. So you can see how the Schwann cell, by wrapping around the axon, can create the myelin sheath. So that is the myelin sheath, and then that is the axon going to be covered by a myelin sheath. And here we can see that we have a bunches of axons that the Schwann cell just going to cover it, but it does not create the myelin sheath around them. So axons are not covered with the myelin, but can be covered by a Schwann cell. Okay. Then the next part, let's talk about the organization of these, like neuron cell body, the different part of the neuron in the central nervous system. If in the portion of the central nervous system we have the collection of the neuron cell body, dendrites, short and non-myelinated axons, and also a neuroglia, that makes that portion or region as a darker region. We call that as gray matter. And if we have mostly myelinated axons in the region of the CNS, we call that part as white matter. So then we can divide our central nervous system to the lighter region and darker region. Lighter region is called white matter and darker region is called gray matter. Gray matter is composed of the neuron cell body, dendrite, non-myelinated axons, and glial cells, and white matter mostly is composed of the myelinated axons. Okay, and in this picture you can see a nerve. That is a nerve. Nerve is considered as an organ. The example of nerve in our body like sciatic nerve, the axillary nerve, the median nerve, the optic nerve, spinal nerve. So if you break them down, you can find nervous tissue, connective tissue, epithelial tissue, which means these are organs. So a nerve is a cable-like organ, which we can find them in the peripheral nervous system. The nerves are the part of the PNS. We have cranial nerves, we have spinal nerves, and then each nerve is consists of, so if you actually cut the nerve, you can see that each nerve is composed of the bundles of axons, which each bundle is called nerve fascicle. And each nerve fascicle is composed of many nerve fibers or axons. Okay, so if you remember, we also, when we covered the organization of the skeletal muscle, we said we have muscle as an organ. Each muscle as an organ is composed of the muscle fascicle. Each muscle fascicle is composed of the muscle fiber, but muscle fiber, it means muscle cell. But here, for the nerve, we have nerve as an organ, and each nerve as an organ is composed of the nerve fascicle, and each nerve fascicle is composed of the nerve fiber, which the nerve fiber means axon. Which our axons can be myelinated or non-myelinated. Can be sensory or can be motor. Okay. So then, let's talk about the connective tissue going to be found around each part of the nerve. We have epinorium, which is the fibrous connective tissue or dense connective tissue, which is a tough connective tissue, going to be found around the whole nerve. It's epinorium. And then each of these nerve fascicles going to be covered by a connective tissue, which is called perinorium. And then each of these nerve fiber or axon can be myelinated or non-myelinated, going to be covered by a connective tissue is called endonorium. Okay, then the term neuron, nerve fiber, and nerve are easy to confuse. Keep in mind, a neuron is a nerve cell. A nerve fiber is a long axon. And a nerve is an organ, is a collection of the axons in the peripheral nervous system. So a nerve is the organ, like the sciatic nerve. Nerve fiber is an axon, and a neuron is a nerve cell. Okay, the last part of this chapter, we're going to talk about a very interesting pathway in our nervous system, which is called a reflex arc. Reflex arc is a simple pathway in the nervous system that causes a quick reaction called a reflex. Let's look at some features of the reflexes. Reflex happen very fast, so it's rapid. They are quick responses to things we feel, to the stimuli. And it's automatic. It means you don't have to think about it. Reflexes happen without any conscious control. Is involuntary means you do not learn these actions. They are natural and they're not planned. Some example of reflexes: when you touch something hot like a stove, you quickly jerk your hand away. That is an example of a reflex. Is rapid, is automatic, is involuntary, right? Or if you eat food that irritates your stomach, you might vomit. Rapid, automatic, involuntary, is not under your control. We have different type of reflexes. So we have somatic reflexes, we have visceral reflexes. According to the type of effectors, we can divide them to the somatic and visceral. If the effectors are skeletal muscle, so then the reflexes are somatic reflexes. For example, moving your hand away from something painful, that is the example of the somatic reflexes. Visceral reflexes means that the effectors can be smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, or glands. For example, the way that your stomach reacts when you eat, or the way that when you are going to like see a very delicious food or smell a very delicious food, your salivary glands start producing the saliva. So that is the example of the visceral reflex. So reflex arcs help us react quickly to situations without even thinking. Let's talk about the parts of the reflex arc. Each part plays an important role in how we react to stimuli. We have receptor, we have sensory neuron, integration center, motor neuron, and effector. This receptor is where the stimulus acts, is where we have that very sensitive structures which they can detect this stimulus or the changes, which is the terminal end of the prefrontal process of a sensory neuron. And then all of these sensory information are going to be gathered and transmits afferent impulses to the CNS by a sensory neuron. And then all of this information going to be sent to the gray matter of the CNS, like the gray matter of the spinal cord or the gray matter of the like brain, and then it's going to be called as integration center. And the motor neuron is the neuron is going to send the output from the integration center to an effector, and the effector can be a muscle or gland. Okay, let's look at this picture and then we can actually review the reflex arc components. We have receptor number 1, which can be found in our skin like in this picture. The receptor, the pain receptor of the skin is going to receive this sharp object as the stimulus, and look at this neuron, which is the sensory neuron, is the example of the unipolar neuron, as we have just one single like cytoplasmic process, then it splits into 2, and then it's going to transmit the sensory impulses or sensory input toward the integration center. So our integration center, we have the interneuron in our spinal cord, which gonna process this information and then make a response, and through the motor neuron we can send all of this motor output to the effector, which can be a muscle. And make sure to review the roots and thank you so much for watching this video.